Hello YouTube, this is a video about a shed that I built. I'd been watching a lot of YouTube videos on topics like cordwood masonry, roundwood framing, soil cement, and different building techniques like that. And I wanted to give them a try, and my goal in building this shed was to use materials I had on hand to make as big and nice a shed as I possibly could for spending as little money as possible. This is a photograph of my design for the shed. I had these little skewer sticks, and I knew that I wanted to use the roundwood framing style, so I made this model. I actually measured the diameter of these sticks and scaled the length of them for the materials that I had, which were lodgepole pine poles, about 4.5-inch nominal diameter, maximum length of 21 feet. So the shed is about 21 feet long, about 15 feet wide. It's 15 or 16 feet tall at the peak, as I remember. The vertical walls are about 9.5 feet. I determined the width of the length of the shed by the 21-foot poles that I had available. I determined the width of the shed so that I'd have a proper slope on the roof with the tin roofing material that I had salvaged, which were 10-foot pieces. This is the I did have some things written down on paper as well. I'd use graph paper and do a few calculations on the side, but when building, I would actually use this scale model to measure and count and I just put together with hot glue and skewers. So here's how it looked in the early stages. You can see that there's 8 uprights, 4 uprights on each of the sides on this pole style frame to start with. The foundations are 3 feet deep. I had my dad come with his post hole digger on his tractor. The diameter of the post holes is 11 or 12 inches. We surveyed this to make sure that they were all on the level when we poured the concrete in the post holes. We used little forms at the top for the top 2 or 3 inches that you can see sticking out of the ground there. So there's quite a bit of concrete that is sitting there as a foundation. Like I said, they're 3 feet deep. I had some scrap metal strap that I used. As you can see here on each one of those pillars for drilling a hole in so that each of the vertical upright pine poles would bolt directly to this metal strap that we put into the pillars when we poured them. We had to make bolts that were long enough so that when we started putting up the crux, the style of frame that this shed is called a crux style frame, which is something that you learn about when you watch the roundwood framing videos on YouTube. And you can see the first crux that we've put up there on the back wall here on this early stage of framing. That's the big cross piece. Each of the 4 uprights are going to get one of those. When we put the crux up, you can see this is how they bolted together with the vertical post and the crux sitting on top of each of the concrete pillars. The joints for the crux and many of the joints where we had 2 round poles crossing each other were made this way so that you could have some flat space where the 2 pieces of round wood come together just with a handsaw laid out on the ground at the right angle that it needed to be, only going in about a 1/4 inch deep with this cut, and then following up with a chisel to make a small flat spot so that when the poles crossed and went together, eventually, like you can see, a couple of bolts here holding poles together. They're laying a flat spot on a flat spot. Now, at the top of each of these verticals, I did do one extra thing on those joints, and I made those mortise and tenon joints. You'll see that in some slides coming up. Once all 4 of the crux went up, I used my best, largest pole, and like I said, these are nominal 4.5 inches. None of them were bigger than about 5 1/4 on these lodgepole pine poles. But you have one there sitting in the top of all 4 crux for the ridge pole. Now, it is a little bit annoying that you have those crux frames that are extending into the interior of the shed, the 2 in the middle, but that is one of the compromises for doing this style of round wood frame. If you want to make a shed this large out of wood that's this small, that's one of the things that you have to tolerate in order to accomplish that. So here's another view of the crux, all up. The verticals are all up. You can see the other parts of the frame. Now these joints are the ones I wanted to talk about that had the special mortise and tenon that we had just cut with a saw on top of the vertical posts, and we'd used a drill and some chisels to create the holes on the horizontal piece. And so every one of the 8 verticals has this mortise and tenon joint on it. Here it is before it's driven together. And you can see the other horizontals that are going across it, so that there's 2 horizontals crossing on top of each of these vertical posts. And then a large lag screw going down through the whole thing. Every time we used a lag screw or a bolt, we'd drill some pilot holes to make sure that this small wood didn't get split. The shed was really stable in one plane, but not very stable in another. And once the roof gets on and all the siding gets on and the half walls get built up, it helps. But I did put in the center panel these cross braces to help stabilize the shed in this plane, and that's how they went together at the bottom on the foundations. Once that's all put together, we started putting on more poles for these, I guess they're called trusses. There's also up there in the attic, going from gable end to gable end, you can see another pole that was put in to help stabilize it. I'm not sure if that one did a lot of good or not, but we left it in. But these round wood trusses, we tried to sight across them, and before we bolt those on, I think they got mostly put on with lag screws. Some of them got bolted through. I think either way's fine, but we'd rotate them and sight across the top of them where the purlins are going to have to lay in order to get them as straight as possible, so there's much contact as possible. The purlins and the roof material will be equally setting weight on each of these trusses. And there's another view of the trusses going in, how they went together. Here's what it starts to look like with the trusses are all getting put together. And this shed took me a long time. I had several members of my family help me from time to time. And I think all told, I spent about 3 years puttering and working on it. I needed to build some half walls up at this point in between the vertical poles. I wanted to use cordwood masonry. The cordwood masonry has to sit on concrete footer, so I formed and poured these footers in between each of the round post where all the verticals were sitting on. I poured a little pad there for a doorway. I put in some bolts. Any kind of metal would do to help hold the masonry on the footings. And then I started putting the roof on. The purlins were actually the first bit of milled lumber that I used in the construction of this building. These are second cut boards from a local sawmill. They made really good purlins, and the metal that I used for the roof was also used, and it had holes in it already from its previous installation. And I was careful to measure out and use a wide width of purlin so that I could reuse the same holes in the galvanized steel roofing, and that worked out real great. I used roofing screws and not nails, the nice ones with the rubber gaskets on them, and I even used silicone on each hole to help ensure I didn't get any leaks with the used roofing. And so far I haven't detected one leak in the whole place. There's another view of the roof going in. It's really gratifying at this point because the roof goes on relatively quickly and it starts looking like a real shed. Now you can see the horizontal piece of the frame with the trusses, roundwood trusses, sitting on top of that, with the purlins sitting on top of that, and how the metal roofing laid on that. I started putting up a little bit of the siding. I had some tongue and groove cedar that a neighbor gave me, which was an overrun from a construction site that I purposed here on putting the upper portion of the siding on my shed. And here it is, starting with the gable ends. And I had these funny triangle windows, which were also salvaged from a construction site that I made work here. Another view of the gable end and the siding going in, and the funny windows, and the whole frame, and how it looks. There, piled to the side, is the tongue and groove siding that I salvaged. And here's the beginnings of the half walls, the cordwood masonry half walls, sitting on the new concrete footings. I cut this cordwood from trees in my yard. It's mostly willow. And one of the greatest expenses in this building was the mortar, which I bought just at Home Depot in bags, mixed up in a wheelbarrow to create these cordwood masonry walls. As I put these walls together, about midway up, I ran electrical wiring through around 3 walls, 2 sides in the back where the cordwood masonry was, with 2 electrical boxes on each of these panels in between the vertical poles. I'd also managed to salvage some of these glass doors, aluminum frame glass doors from some store that went out of business or something. My brother actually had several of these with aspirations to build a greenhouse one day, and it never happened. He wanted to get rid of them, so I incorporated them into this building. And there's actually 5 windows that I used. One of them as a door, 4 of them as windows. And this is how they went in after the half-wall masonry walls were put up. I'd set the windows on top of those half walls and then just used lag screws to put them into the vertical posts with a mortar joint there between the half wall and the window. Here's one of the rear windows going in. It's starting to come together real nice. I had to work around the cross brace in that center panel with the cordwood masonry. And here it is with the cordwood masonry half walls almost finished. The last one is right there in the foreground, covered with a blanket so that it won't freeze the mortar during the night. This must have been in October, and it's starting to cool off, and I finally had the cordwood masonry half walls in. You can see the windows installed, the roof on, and the door frame framed up. There's one end of the electrical wiring that I incorporated into the cordwood masonry. Now I'm ready to do the siding for the top half of the walls, and we used some scrap lumber. Here you can see a bit of it going across the top underneath the lip of the roof as a way to prepare a place to start putting in the cedar tongue and groove. And we had to do a little bit of trimming of the ends of the roof trusses so that we could put the tongue and groove siding over the top of that with as little gap as possible at the top. Here's the first 2 pieces of tongue and groove siding started at the top, being installed with a little peek at how we had to shim out some of the vertical posts to make the siding all work. And the siding went up relatively quickly, and I used some extra pieces of it to build these 2 big doors for the front of the shed, and even found a little license plate from a bicycle when I was a kid that I actually got from saving box tops on cereal, and save enough box tops and send it in, and they would send you a personalized license plate for your bicycle. My mother saved it, gave it to me, and I put it here. So now we call this the Shane Shack. Here's another view of the front of the Shane Shack. I didn't do half walls on the front side. I just used siding solely for the front. Here it is with the big doors on the front open. I made the doors wide enough so that I could pull my pickup truck inside here if I ever wanted to. I've never done that, but at least it's an option. You can see the window in the back is hinged. That's the only window in the building that's hinged, so that when we open the front doors and prop that window in the back open, we can get a lot of airflow through the shed when it's necessary. I didn't know what to do for a floor, and I'd watched some YouTube videos on soil cement, and I thought I'd give that a try. And to be honest, I regret doing that. Um, we bought some bags of cement, enough to cover the entire floor with 2 or 3 inches, which we then tilled in with a bit of water just to keep the dust down with a garden tiller. Just tilled it right into the soil. Uh, and you can read about this in the videos that are about soil cement. We used a laser level and a landscape rake to get everything as level as we possibly could. We sprayed it down with a little bit more moisture and then compacted it with this little compactor machine that we got at the rental place. Went around the whole floor a couple of times, and then we set up these sprinklers inside and ran those sprinklers overnight so that we made sure that everything got nice and wet and percolated down through. And the resulting floor was supposed to be, not as nice as a cement floor, but maybe adequate for a shed floor. It turned out to be just a hard dirt floor that has a lot more dirt that comes off of it than I was expecting. So the best I've got here is a foundation for a better floor that I hopefully can muster to put in here someday, whether it's bricks or pavers or concrete or wood. I've already got a solid foundation with the soil cement. That's the best I did. This is a really good view of the Cordwood Masonry walls. They look nice. They're really solid, and you can see the electrical boxes that with the wires sticking out that we've got spread around the walls in this photo. Started bringing in the tools and the workbenches and some old cabinets that I'd salvaged. Started installing this kind of stuff around the shed, making it so that I can use it the way that I want it to. Another view of that back window, propped open. We get the airflow through. This is from standing in the back of the shed, looking out the front, with the big doors open in the front, and you can see the small man door on the side there on the right. It's just another one of those salvaged glass doors. I put a little potbelly stove in. It really heats it up well in the wintertime, just with a single wall chimney that went out straight up through the metal roof. There's a view where you can see where the chimney comes out. And the next year I started building this little side roof thing. After a couple of winters, it was clear that the angle of this roof was going to shed the snow real well. No snow accumulated on it. But if I continued with that roof angle for another 10-foot piece of metal roofing, it was just going to be too low. So I had to bump the angle up here to put this piece of metal roofing on. And you can see I've dug post holes with 4 new verticals and another horizontal. Attaching the new roof trusses to the existing building was a bit of a challenge here. I ended up building the same style of roof, the same way, for this little shelter off the side of the shed, which really adds a lot, I think, to the shed. I used a big hole saw to cut a hole in the siding for each one of these new roundwood roof trusses, so that they could sit on the same horizontal frame member that the roof trusses for the original building are sitting on. And it made a real tight and tidy installation. Here you can see the inside of the building. You can see one of the verticals there on the left, the horizontal member sitting on top. You can see the original trusses of the building sitting on that horizontal member, and you can see the ends, the three ends there, of the new trusses for the new roof that got poked through the holes in the siding that I did with the hole saw. And there's what it all looks like together today for now. I'm really happy with the way the shed turned out. I'm especially happy with the Cordwood Masonry and the roundwood framing. It's a really solid shed. I was afraid that it might not be strong enough or wobbly enough with using this size of wood, but I've come out in several really strong windstorms to try to feel any movement inside the shed, and it's solid as a rock. I would definitely do this again. The only thing I was really disappointed in is that the soil cement, but I'll find a way to improve and make a better floor in the future. I hope this has given you some ideas and inspiration to go ahead and try out some of the ideas that you see while you're watching YouTube videos, and that you can do something like this. Use materials you have on hand for relatively cheap.